Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. The goal of Buddhism is often referred to as enlightenment. That's another one of those English translations that is inadequate. I'm really not sure how the term enlightenment became sort of the standard in English. Doesn't correspond really well to anything in the Pali. The moment of breakthrough into the unconditioned is referred to as awakening bodhi, and this is what the Buddha means. It means one who is awakened, from the verb buddhati, or as vimutti, liberation, or in a technical usage in the Abhidhamma they talk about path and fruit, magga-phala. The system in the Theravada tradition talks about 4 stages of awakening. That it isn't all at once. The immersion into the full realization of the unconditioned takes 4 distinct stages. In northern India, the climate is hot, and most of the poetic metaphors about Nibbana talk about cooling. One of our Canadian Ajahns, Ajahn Sona, suggested a set of analogies more appropriate for our northern climate, that we don't regard cooling as being liberating generally. Maybe today it's hot and humid, but usually we tend to value warmth more. So he came up with this set of analogies for the 4 stages. It's like you're walking outdoors in the winter in a cold blizzard and you're freezing, and you see a cabin and there's a light on in the window, and you go up and you look through the window and you see it's nice and cozy inside. There's a fire going and there's a kerosene lantern burning. And this walking in the blizzard is like being in samsara and looking through the window and seeing there is something other than this blizzard in existence. This is like stream entry. And you manage to get the window open a crack, and you can feel the warmth of the air inside on your face. That's like the 2nd stage, Sakadagami. Then you manage to get the window almost fully open, and you have your head and shoulders inside, and so you're feeling the comfort of the interior of the cabin, but your feet are still out on the cold earth. That's like 3rd stage, Anagami. And Arahant is like you're inside the cabin with the window shut, sitting in a comfy chair with your feet up by the stove. So all our experience as beings living in the conditioned world in samsara is of a piece relative to Nibbana. Whether it's hell realms or heaven realms or human realms, it's all conditioned. And Nibbana is outside of that system altogether. It's not a special place within the cosmos. It's something outside, something altogether not this. There's a bit of a conundrum in that Nibbana, or the unconditioned, asankata is the unconditioned, so another term for Nibbana, is extremely difficult, or it's actually impossible to describe or speak about, because words and language is conditioned. When I first became interested in Buddhism, the Theravada tradition attracted me in part because of the very pure way they approach the idea of the transcendental. There's no attempt to personify it or to depict it as some kind of special realm. They're quite clear about it being utterly other and not to be thought of as this or that. The conundrum is that while this is a very pure and exalted and uncorrupted way of speaking about it, it has the disadvantage of not really giving you much to go on initially. Like, we tell you, you got to keep all this morality, you have to meditate, you have to really try and purify your mind, and at the end you'll realize Nibbana. Well, what's Nibbana? Well, can't really tell you. Believe me, it's worth it. It's not. It's kind of you. It takes a lot of faith and courage, to tread this path. Faith is a critical component for making any kind of progress, and it's primarily faith in the Third Noble Truth, the fact that there is an unconditioned. But most of the rest of the essentials of the Buddhist system are susceptible to reason and argumentation and immediate experience, but Nibbana is not. You can get an inkling by noticing how peaceful the mind is when it's not corrupted by the defilements. But it's only the barest semblance of the actual Nibbana. One way of describing the progress through the 4 stages is in terms of the 10 Samyojna. This is probably the most useful scheme for thinking about the stages of awakening, because it's not based on attaining anything, because really you're not attaining anything. There's nothing to attain. There's nowhere to go. It's more a question of what you can purify yourself of, what you can remove from, what corruptions you can remove from the psyche, and then the higher states of consciousness all the way up to the unconditioned will naturally manifest, because they're there all the time. They're just obscured by the defilements. There are different lists of defilements, but the important one in this context is the list of the 10 Samyojna. And yojana means a yoke or a binding. So these are the mental states that bind you to conditioned existence. And there's a list of 10, and they are transcended or destroyed by the different stages. The stage of Sotapanna, stream enterer, the first stage of entrance into the Arahant state, is marked by the elimination of the fetters of Sakaya Ditty, which is personality view, Silabata Paramasa, which is usually translated as rites and rituals clinging, but we'll get back to that. That's another one where the English translation is more harm than help. And the third is Vichikitcha, or skeptical doubt or uncertainty. Sakaya Ditty is the self-view, and this idea of a self or a atta, abiding person, is something that's not destroyed all at once. It's very deep-seated, and there are different levels to it. The Fetter of Sakaya Ditty, literally the word Sakaya Ditty means own body view, and it's usually translated as personality view. It operates on the level of Ditty, which is view, or how you understand the world, or cognitive sense. Prior to stream entry, The Patujana, this is a word that means literally the common folk or the many folk. This is someone who has not attained to one of the 4 stages. It's called Patujana. And someone who has one of the stages is called an Arahant. These are terms borrowed from the class structure of India, nobles and commoners, Arahants and Patujanas. So a Patujan is someone who has not glimpsed Nibbana. They inevitably will have some concept of a self. You can approach the idea of not self from different directions. One way is by breaking up the compact unit of a human organism in your mind, thinking of the different components. This is the method of Abhidhamma, to see elements of body, elements of mind, and not finding anywhere a self. The other approach is to see causation, to see that nothing exists from its own side. Everything is relational. Things only exist as effects of causes. So nothing can be really seen as a self-contained, standalone unit. It's only a relational nexus. It's only the result of innumerable causes coming together momentarily. And these approaches are what we could call cognitive or intellectual approaches to the idea of not self. And it's like a mathematical asymptote. It gets closer and closer to zero, but never quite reaches it. You can't really fully understand what is meant by not self until you have the realization of stream entry. But you can get vanishingly close to it, and should be making an effort to do that, to make the transition into stream entry easier, simpler, as part of the preparation. So one who has attained stream entry cannot hold self-view anymore. It does not make any sense to them. So that fetter is broken. The fetter of Silabhata Paramasa, a literal translation of that would be reliance on rules and duties. Sila and Vata are, in terms of practice, they're actually both quite important. Sila is your morality, and Vata is duties that should be done. So basically they're the do's and don'ts. Sila tells you what things to refrain from, and Vata is duties that one should perform. And following those is essential, but holding them in the mind as some kind of magical rites is what's meant by Silabhata Paramasa. And on a subtle level, on a more subtle level, it's seeing the development in the mind in meditation in a mechanical way. Like if I just do this technique and exactly do this and that and hold my body in this way and do this and that with my breath and with my mind, and I'll realize awakening. Now, people generally think when they hear about Silabhata Paramasa, because of the translation as rites and rituals clinging, people say, oh, I'm not prone to that. I don't believe in rites and rituals. But they're not understanding the subtlety of it, misunderstanding the nature of things. You could say that it, in essence, means seeing the unconditioned as conditioned. If you're holding to Silabhata Paramasa, you're thinking that the realization of the unconditioned is a product of conditions. So you still have a mechanical view of even the transcendental. Vicikiccha is uncertainty or skeptical doubt. It's the wavering of mind. And again, we have to be a bit careful with the translation. It's not quite really what's meant by the English word skepticism or even doubt. These words are a bit wrong, a bit off. There's a Zen saying, little doubt, little enlightenment, big doubt, big enlightenment. It is important to keep the mind open, to not be rigid or dogmatic, and to be open, to have a good questioning attitude in the mind. This is not Wicikitcha. Wicikitcha is an uncertainty of mind, and when you're in Wicikitcha, you notice it's unpleasant, there's a restlessness to it. As the mind wants, desires certainty, but doesn't have it. So it oscillates between A and B, and it's seeking a spurious certainty. Wicikitcha is this doubt, and the opposite of Wicikitcha is Saddha, faith or confidence. And how this applies to the stream entry is that the stream winner has no longer any doubt about the conditioned and the unconditioned, because he or she has glimpsed Nibbana, has glimpsed the unconditioned. So, there is something. The stream enterer has not fully realized or entered into Nibbana, but has just had a glimpse, like the curtain has parted, and there's a glimpse, and okay. So there's no doubt anymore in the mind whatsoever about the possibility of liberation. So we see that these three fetters, the initial three fetters, have to do primarily with the view. And stream entry is also seen as a purification of view, and a synonym for it is the opening of the Dhamma eye, because the unconditioned has been known, if briefly. And this experience of the unconditioned is profound. Whatever imaginings about it that the Patujana has will be wrong. In one regard, it will be much less than what you perhaps imagine as a Patujana. You imagine amazing, spectacular phenomena. But on the other hand, it's much, much deeper and profounder than anything you can imagine. And it makes a complete change in the depth of the being. There's no coming back from that. It's a transformation in the depth, turning around in the depth. And one of the characteristics of stream entry is that the individual can only be reborn 7 more times at most. They're on their way out. And they can never be reborn into a lower realm than human. So the gates of hell are shut. It's like there's now a lower level that the mind cannot sink below. So however low or into despair the mind can plunge, there's a limit. The stream enterer cannot go below. The second stage is called Sakadagami, which means once returner. And such a person who has attained to the second stage of awakening can only be reborn into the human realm 1 more time, although he may have a few higher births. But at most he'll only take 1 more human birth, and certainly never take a lower birth. The stage of Sakadagami is a subtle one, because no fetters are actually completely destroyed at this stage, but the 2 fetters of sensual desire and ill will, kamachanda and vyapada, are attenuated or weakened or made more subtle, but they're not eliminated from the mind. So one thing I have heard, thus have I heard about Sakadagami, is that in the case of a bhikkhu, a Sakadagami would never disrobe for reasons of sensual desire. It's not possible. Sexual attraction may arise in the mind, but it would never be strong enough to cause such a one to give up the training. In general, the Sakadagami would never do anything grossly foolish or wrong based on sensual desire or ill will. It would never be strong enough to shake them, although it may arise in the mind. The anagami, the third stage, is the non-returner, one who does not come back to the human realm ever again. When an anagami dies, if they don't attain arahantship, they are reborn only in the Suddhavasa, the pure abodes, very refined states of existence. The anagami has utterly destroyed the two fetters of sense desire and ill will. They simply do not arise in the mind stream of an anagami at all. They're gone. The anagami is still, however, subject to what are called the 5 higher fetters. Probably a better name for them would be the 5 deeper fetters. They're because they underlie the other ones that are now gone. And these are desire for fine material existence, desire for immaterial existence, restlessness, what is called the I am conceit, and ignorance. Fine material existence and immaterial existence refer to the higher realms, the realms of the Brahmas and the realms of the formless beings. So this person has no longer any desire for sense objects, so is not subject to birth in the sensual desire realm ever again. There's no motive force for it. There's no desire to exist on that level. But there still remains a desire for existence. Bhavatanha still pertains, the desire to be. So they have an energy or an impulse to come to birth, but it's manifested only in higher planes. It doesn't occur in this tawdry realm of sense desire. The I am conceit is the subtler form of self-view. Now we talked about Sakaya Ditty as being based on view, Ditty. The I am conceit, asmi mana, is a subtler form of self that is more a question of perspective. It's based on sanya, or perception. So one perceives the universe from a privileged point of view. It's a lack of total relativity. So while an anagami no longer believes in a self, they still perceive the world as if there was a self. They see self and other. So this is a very more subtle trace of self-view that is only overcome by the Arahant. The anagami is still subject to it. Restlessness is the discontent in the mind with what is the present situation, the present object of consciousness. The mind is discontented with just staying with that and wants to shift. Restlessness is one of the hindrances that comes up in meditation. And knowing this teaching, that it's only overcome by the Arahant, should give you some encouragement to feel better about yourself if you feel restless, because you're not going to be completely free of restlessness until you attain Arahantship. There's always going to be some degree. In general, the cure for restlessness is to sit still. If you fidget and change posture, you don't overcome restlessness. You're just feeding it. You need to really forcibly restrain the body and the mind and sit very still. Sleepiness is the opposite, then you need to get up and do something vigorous. Ignorance is the deepest of all the defilements, the last of the Samyojna. It's the most fundamental. It's a not understanding, not knowing the nature of reality. So misapprehending because of ignorance. And this is the ultimate cause of all our suffering and our entire existence. It emerges from not knowing the Four Noble Truths. Ajahn Mahabua, famous Thai master who died fairly recently, within the last decade. Anyway, I can't remember the date exactly. One of his last talks that he gave has been translated into English, and it was caused quite a sensation in Thailand when he gave this talk, and it was printed, transcribed, and published. It's Arahata Magga Arahata Pala, in which he spoke quite openly about his experience of arahantship. This is controversial because it's actually a Vinaya offense. A monk is not supposed to speak of his own experience, but I think he knew he was near the end of his life, and he thought this would be useful for people, so he took the pachitya, as we say. He broke the rule and gave this really brilliant talk about his experience of arahantship. And I'd recommend anybody to read that. And he says in that talk that for a long time in his meditation he was experiencing brilliant light, a clear light. And he thought this was the full-on awakening. He thought this was it. Which is kind of not unusual to think that. There's much that glitters that is not gold, and there's many powerful experiences that arise in meditation that people mistake for one of the stages of awakening, but they're not. And some religious traditions seek out this clear light. But in the end, he decided, or he realized, that this clear light that he was seeing, this brilliant clear light, was actually the last manifestation of ignorance. It was avidya in its purest form. And he got beyond this and penetrated through to the unconditioned. So this was like samsara at its absolute minimum. Just manifesting as light before it differentiates into forms and objects. So the Arahant is one who has overcome all the 10 fetters, and the Arahant does not come back into conditioned existence ever again. They've made an end, they've laid down the burden, become like a palm tree stump, not to arise again in future time. So that's the 10 Samyojna, and this is probably, as I said, the most useful scheme or model for understanding the process of awakening. For one, it gives the practitioner a test, a touchstone, to see if an experience they've had is an actual penetration of the unconditioned. For example, if you think you have attained stream entry, the advice is to examine the mind again and again for the 3 first fetters: personality view, rites and ritual clinging, and skeptical doubt, and make sure they're absolutely eradicated. To do this test requires an intellectual understanding of what those terms mean, so one should investigate that. But the sense of belief in any kind of eternalist or materialist system is totally gone, because the view is purified. It's not possible to fall into those gross errors again. Sakadagami is more difficult to test because the fetters are only attenuated. But an anagami, someone who thinks they've attained anagami, can examine to see if there's any sense desire or ill will left, even at a subtle level. And an arahant should be free of all the defilements. Another way of speaking about the realization is in terms of the Eightfold Path. And this takes us to the Abhidhamma description of Maggapala. The Abhidhamma describes the mind moments leading to emergence into the unconditioned as having a path moment followed by a fruit moment. The path moment is a karmically effective moment, and the fruit moment is a karmically resultant moment. The path moment is the moment in which the 8 factors of the Eightfold Noble Path come together on a transcendental level, a super-mundane level, lokuttara, beyond the world. Up until that point, we practice the Eightfold Path on the lokaya level, on the level of the world, of the mundane. So right view, the first path factor, is defined in the Pali Canon in both a mundane and supramundane aspect. The mundane aspect is having a right view as to cause and effect. So seeing karma, rebirth, this world and the other world, and holding that as your view. That's right view on a mundane level. On a supramundane level, it's the Four Noble Truths. The key is the realization of samsara as suffering and nibbana as transcending suffering. And the transcendental path factors are all aligned to nibbana. The path factor of Samasankapa, right intention, in the mundane level is having intentions that are based on non-greed, non-harming, and non-delusion. In the supramundane level, it's the intention of the mind to enter the unconditioned. Samyojna, right speech, is in the mundane level, it's not telling lies, not speaking harshly, etc. On the supramundane level, we're not talking anymore about speech, verbal expression, external expression, but a thought process, vitakka vichara. The thought process is aligned to pointing towards only nibbana, only the unconditioned. Likewise with samakamanta, right action. There's no external action, but the action is of the mind towards entering nibbana. Samyojna is the right livelihood. On the mundane level, this is how you make your living. You do it in an honest way, in a non-harming way, and avoid the forbidden trades. So it's basically how you feed your body, what you do in the world to feed your body. But on the supramundane level, it's now, what does the mind feed on? It feeds on nibbana. It's completely aligned. Your livelihood at that moment in your mind is based on nibbana. Samyojna, right effort, on the mundane level is the effort to purify the mind of defilement and to raise up beneficial states. On the supramundane level, it's the effort to realize nibbana. Samasati, mindfulness, right mindfulness, is mindfulness on the mundane level directed towards the 4 satipatthana, the body, feeling, consciousness, and the mind objects. And on the supramundane level, it's mindfulness of nibbana, of the unconditioned. Samasamadhi, right focus, is the stillness of mind on an object, and that object on the supramundane level is the unconditioned. So the mind comes together in one moment, purified completely on nibbana, and all 8 path factors, click, are aligned that way. And this is a comically effective moment, meaning it's an action of the mind and it has a result. And the result is received immediately as the experience of nibbana. And this is the fruit. And the fruit can be in one of those 4 grades, first, second, third, fourth stage. So this is the way it's spoken of in the Abhidhamma in terms of mind moments. And it's something that's found by practicing diligently, at all levels. Beginning with sila, keeping good morality. And if you're living heedlessly in an immoral way, you haven't got a chance to make any progress. Bhavana is the development of the mind, exercise of the mind, principally meaning meditation. And Panya is the arising of wisdom, the development of seeing things as they actually are, which you do with a purified and nimble mind. Yeah? And the prime practice for this is vipassana, which is a disciplined effort of looking at things as they actually are. And the realization of Nibbana comes in this sense by a process of exhaustion. You examine the contents of samsara, of the conditioned stream, one by one by one by one, as they arise, with a mind that's detached, dispassionate, clear, and you see them all as empty, as impermanent, as imperfect, as subject to change and dissolution. When the objects are not looked at with that clear light, then the mind tends to get lost in either fear or fascination. We're blown away by the beautiful and we're terrified of the horrible, and the mind is lost in this sort of mass of confusion. But if the objects are looked at with this dispassionate eye, they're seen just as they are. They're seen all as essentially the same. They're just empty, impermanent, just more of the same, more of the same. So the mind is no longer feeding that process, which is what attachment and aversion do, or fear and fascination. The mind is not priming the pump anymore, and it runs down. Eventually the mind is so lightly attached to the process that it slips sideways, as it were, and it realizes the unconditioned. And this is the profound purification that should be the aim and goal of the practice.